Hey BookTube, things have been crazy. Um, so what I'm gonna do today is kind of go over the my Pentathon reading and the enormous rabbit hole that I ended up going down. Okay, are you ready? Good. Um, okay, so at first I was just reading a couple Lovecraft stories. And then, and this is like what, Friday? And then I had a couple things to do around the house. So I found a LibriVox H.P. Lovecraft audiobook thing. So I plugged in my earbuds and was around doing stuff and listening. And some of the stories I read this weekend, I feel like were like read for the first time. Like I know I've read them before, but there was something about them this time that like made them different. And I'll tell you about those in a sec. But then I had a bunch of driving around to do, running errands, and I was just listening to H.P. Lovecraft stories like all day Friday and like half the day Saturday. Oh my gosh. So I'll go down the list of the ones that I read. Now, some of these are considered like his, like the stories that he wrote when he was a kid, because there's a gap, like from 1907 or 190, yeah, I think it's like 1907 to 1918, where he didn't really do anything. Like, I think he was in school and like writing for like the newspaper, like the school paper or something like that. And then in college, he was like head of the literature society of the university he was at, or something like that. So there was like a good period where he wasn't doing a lot of writing, I guess. But so those stories are like the little glass bottle, which is like a silly, um, like funny story about like making sailors hunt for treasure is the best way I could describe it, and it's super short. Um, and but like The Alchemist, which was a lot better than I remember it being, but The Beast in the Cave, that he wrote when he was like 13 or 14, and the it's so good. Like it's a typical Lovecraft story. Like it has the feel of a lot of the kind of more gothic-y horror, but without the gothic part to it, but the same beats, I guess you could say. I got the Pulp Fiction podcast back up, but it's on the Weird Mask site now. It should be on iTunes today, but I don't know how long it takes them to like propagate all that crap. But if you go to weirdmask.com, it's there, and I spend a bit of time talking about that story. But anyway, so like Beyond the Wall of Sleep, Celophaeus, I always The Doom That Came to Sarnath, Ex Oblivione, I think. And then the Arthur German story, which I think is the facts around the family of Arthur German or something like that. Herbert West Reanimator, always a classic. Memory, The Music of Eric Zahn, The Nameless City, Nyarlathotep, Polaris, The Reminiscence of Samuel Johnson. Not one of my favorite things. This is one of those early-ish, not horror stories. The Statement of Randolph Carter, The Street, The Terrible Old Man, The Tomb, The Tree, The White Ship, and I already said The Little Glass Bottle. But then I read History of the Necronomicon, which was like a... I don't know if it's the same as what Robert E. Howard did when he wrote The Hyborian Age. I don't know if he was using this as like a kind of like a outline for how he was going to present the Necronomicon in future works or whatever. But oh my gosh, this is a good little history. But what this did was oh wait, no, it was this and his he wrote an article about weird fiction. That's what it was. So I read that as well. And in that it had like like he listed off some stories that he thought were great or whatever. And so me just like poking around started looking some of this stuff up, and I ended up finding quite a few of them and some others, and started reading. And so I read The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers, and a lot of these authors are like linked through stuff, because like The King in Yellow comes up in Lovecraft stuff. It comes up in I believe August Derleth stuff, and it also comes up in the games like the Call of Cthulhu game and all this other stuff like that. But frick, man, The King in Yellow, it's like a collection of short stories that kind of loosely, some more than others, revolve around this play that has been banned everywhere because if you read it, you'll go crazy. And so the first story in here, The Repairer of Reputations, which I thought was like the worst title in the world, is probably one of the best stories I have ever read. Like, as far as it, like, I love my unreliable narrators. I love my, you are your own worst enemy kind of stories. And man, this is so good. Now, what I will say is that The King in Yellow, it again is broken up into stories. Some of the stories are really good and really creepy. The Yellow Sign is really creepy. The Mask is good. It was weird. It kept my interest the whole time, and it was just kind of weird. The Court of the Dragon was very suspenseful. But the Yellow Sign was definitely weird and kind of gross. Repair of Reputations was just amazing. Then they kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's like the weirdness and the bizarre kind of start tapering off a bit. And then there's a bunch of stories called like The Street, blah, 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 or whatever. By the time I got to there, like, it was so different that it was, I don't know, it was just different. And then, you know, at the end of the book, it's the end of the book. But I would recommend everybody getting this for at least the Repair of Reputations and the Yellow Sign. The Repair of Reputations, I mean, again, this was written in like the late 1890s or something like that, or mid 1890s. And it takes place in 1920. And the vision of the world is so bizarre to what happened in actuality. But then again, you don't know how much of this is true and how much of this is crap, because we have an unreliable narrator. So, anyway, so that was great. Then another super good one that I had never heard of was The Upper Berth by F. Marion Crawford. So good. And when it started, I was like, oh, this guy sounds like such a pretentious effer. And but the story totally kept me engaged the whole time, and I was like, I was just totally into it. So I highly recommend that. The Damned Thing by Ambrose Bierce, which I've never read for some stupid reason, was great. And then like I just read Lost Hearts by M.R. James and The Bad Old Woman in Black by Lord Dunsany. And for some reason, I thought that was going to have something to do with The Woman in Black, the Susan Hill story, and it didn't. So, well, it did. It didn't. So anyway, and then like last night I was reading Vampire by Polidori and fell asleep. So if that tells you anything about that. So anyway, the last like this weekend has just been so jam-packed with tons of reading and great stuff. I feel like I've missed like a whole world of reading because like old like ghost stories, like turn of the century ghost stories and stuff like that, that's never been like a big part of my reading. But whereas Zoe, she comes from England, and for some reason, and I don't know why this is, but during like the Christmas season, you read ghost stories and totally horrific things. And so a lot of these like Lost Hearts, that terrifies her. And I don't know if she has read The Upper Berth. I got to talk to her about that when she gets home. But man, like, whew. So anyway, I just had a great weekend of reading amazing short stories, and it's just blown my mind. So then this morning I woke up, got Shaylee off to school, took Zoe to work, and Steve was talking on the Voxer chat that we have for the Brewster's Millions read along. And I didn't read it this weekend because I realized I had read ahead, like farther than I was supposed to. So I kind of laid off of it. And he was talking about something on there about like a lull in the book. And if you're a part of the Brewster's Millions read along, just stop watching now because I'm going to talk about it. And I felt that lull. And to me, it pretty much started when, if you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. When they leave New York, or they go to Florida. And I was just like, ugh. And from like 16 to 22, it was just like a real slog for me. And 22 is where I left off on Thursday. So I started up again, and man, chapter 23 hits, and it's like it it like grabs you and shakes you and smacks you, and you can't put it down at that point. Once you get to that point, you can't stop reading it. Like, you have to finish the book at that point, which is 34 chapters. And they're not long chapters. But holy macaroni, let me tell you. I was sitting right there reading it going, like, I was like totally short of breath the whole time. I was like, ugh. I was so into it. So, um, and if you don't know the story of Brewster's Millions, um, Brewster's this like old money kind of guy. Um, his grandfather dies and leaves him $1 million. And then some other distant relative that he didn't know he had dies and says, like, basically, I hated your grandfather. If you can, within the next year, spend all of his money and become completely destitute, I'll give you $7 million. So you have a year to spend $1 million to make 7 million, but you can't tell anybody about it. So the whole time his friends are dicks, and I mean, they're not dicks. They're like turn of the century dicks, if that makes any sense. Like, but man, so like it's funny. Like, there are funny moments. I didn't find it as funny as a lot of other people have found it. I don't think I found it more stressful, but goddamn, man, from chapter 23 on, it's so worth the read. Like, the book's good through the first like 10 or 12 chapters. Like, you're totally into it. But there is a bit of a lull, but good freaking lord, man. I don't want to oversell it. I feel like I already have, but yeah, the poof, it's really good. So that saved the book for me. Just like those first four, I'll say 5 stories, and the King in Yellow saved King in Yellow for me. But man, I'm just so excited. Like, this has been seriously like one of the like just biggest reading weekends for me. And I had a lot of stuff I had to do, and like a lot of driving around, so the audiobook bits helped. And considering like everything I've read this weekend is public domain, like, I have it on my computer, I have it on my phone, I have it in the car. It's like it's like I have it everywhere, and that is always fun to know that it's just nice to know that your books are everywhere. But anyway, so I'm really excited to read more like ghost stories and horror stories from like the late 1800s, and I've never really dug that before. Like, yes, I grew up on Edgar Allan Poe, so there's that whole sense of stuff, but like there's a ton of like H.G. Wells stuff that is kind of creepy that I've never read. I've only really dug into like his, like the typical Invisible Man, Time Machine, Dr. Moreau, or yeah, I love Dr. Moreau, and come on, what's wrong with you? Oh, War of the fucking Worlds, Jesus Christ. But like, he wrote a ton of short, like, weird horror stuff. And then I was glancing at this Kipling story, Mark of the Beast, and started reading through that, and that was amazing. I didn't list it because I didn't like finish reading it. I was just like going on the different like free public domain sites, and I would like check something and I'd read like the first however much I wanted to read of it. A lot of this stuff started out as me reading like the first few lines to see if I want to read it, and then I just finish it. So, but yeah, dude, Mark of the Beast, like I don't know how it ends or nothing, but freaking hell, like that got really chaotic, and like it made me look up the sound an otter makes, and now I'm terrified. So if you know what I'm talking about, like you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I just like appreciate everyone who's taken part in the Pentathon, and even though I did read quite a bit of Lovecraft this weekend, so I'm not poo-pooing that. But I mean, if it wasn't for the stories that he mentioned, I never would have done any other reading this weekend. And it's just, this was a phenomenal rabbit hole. So let me know how you guys did. Let me know what you read this weekend anyway, what your plans are for the week. Oh yeah, and if you want to listen to the Pulp Fiction Literary Podcast, Volume 2, just go over to weirdmass.com and you could listen to that until it is available on iTunes. So, like, subscribe, send me your phone number, and all that other fun stuff.